Hello and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. So, recently, Netflix released a new series of He-Man, and as a big fan of He-Man when I was a kid, I was really looking forward to this. And I watched it, the first 5 episodes at least, and for me, it didn't disappoint. I understand that some people didn't get what they wanted out of it, okay. However, the right wing and the Chudosphere has jumped with both feet onto this, spreading misinformation as they are wont to do. So I thought we could take a look at a video by Jeremy of the Quartering, where he is bound to be spreading more lies, and then we'll have a think about why they may be doing this. Let's jump straight in, shall we?
In a story that started nearly 6 months ago, with Clownfish TV reporting on insider information that the new He-Man show would embarrass He-Man.
Notice how he's being very vague about these claims, that it would generally embarrass He-Man. No, that wasn't the claim. In fact, there were at least 3 very specific claims about what would be happening in the new He-Man show, and that was the first, that Teela would be pushing He-Man aside and saying, and the show would also be corroborating, that she was a better He-Man than He-Man ever was. That's claim number 1. Claim number 2 is that Teela would be, in the show, a lesbian going around with her lesbian lover. That's claim number 2. And claim number 3 is that Teela would take up the sword of power and effectively completely replace He-Man himself. Those were the 3 specific claims.
A rumor that was vehemently denied by Kevin Smith.
Yep, Kevin Smith did come out and make clear that those 3 specific claims were untrue. Something that at the time, even though Kevin Smith is the, main guy on this show and, knows what's actually happening, when he pointed out that those rumors were incorrect, people accused him of lying at that point, even though he knew and they didn't. He said very clearly that Teela does not push He-Man aside and become a better He-Man than He-Man was, or that being any kind of arc in the show. He also denied that she was going to be a lesbian and carry on with on adventures with her lesbian lover. He denied that that was the case, and he also denied that Teela would wield the sword of power.
Kevin Smith, a man that is on record, caught in 4K several times, contradicting himself, saying that he's got no love for He-Man. He never watched the cartoon. But then once he got the job with Netflix and he found another IP to leech off of, then it was, I've always been a fan. I remember getting home from school and I would always watch He-Man when I was a kid.
This too is false. Kevin Smith did not, in fact, say that. Kevin Smith did say he'd never been a fan, and he still maintains that he was never a fan of the show. He's never claimed to have been a fan. He has said that he watched every episode, and he said the reason he watched every episode is it was just on TV, and that's what people did during that time. They watched through the scheduled programming, and maybe you wanted to see something before and or after it, and ended up watching every single episode when it was on at the time. So, why is Jeremy from the Quartering so eager to paint Kevin Smith as a liar? It's very strange.
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't think that there's any rule that says you must be a super fan of something in order to produce a good quality film on that. I think that my opinion has evolved over the years on this, but what is frustrating is when people who get these IPs pretend they were a fan all along.
Which just simply has not happened. What Kevin Smith has said time and time again is that he wasn't a super fan of the show, wasn't even a fan of the show, but he's come to appreciate the lore in working on it, and there are 3 people who are in charge of this show, which is repeatedly called the 3 pillars of Motu, and he's one of them. The other 2 are super fans of the show, and as he says, those 2 people kept him on track with regard to the sorts of things that fans would be interested in seeing. And as a fan myself, I think he did a pretty good job so far.
Because real fans can sniff you out. Look, I had a twin sister. I still have a twin sister. And on my 5th birthday or 6th birthday cake, I remember we'd always get sheet cakes for our birthdays because they were cheap. My family didn't have a lot of money. And on one half, a Barbie graphic. On the other half, He-Man. I remember this cake vividly in my mind. Now, I know the original He-Man show was just a show like many others designed almost entirely to sell toys, but when I was a kid, I loved it. I didn't know that it was a mediocre show.
I just want to draw attention to the fact that he just said it was a mediocre show. Just drawing attention to the fact that Jeremy Quartering doesn't actually like He-Man anyway.
I just loved He-Man, I loved Skeletor, I loved all the action. I had all the action figures, I had Castle Grayskull, I had everything, because it worked. Now, 30 years later, I must admit I was not interested in a Masters of the Universe revelation produced by Netflix, because Netflix has literally never made a single thing better in the history of Netflix. Why would I think that another Netflix adaptation was going to be worth my time? And now the reviews are in, and we have confirmed that Masters of the Universe Revelation is, of course, about Teela, and of course about embarrassing He-Man. Of course, because we always knew it would be.
So, just to reiterate, the 3 specific points of the prediction of the so-called leak were that Teela would push aside He-Man and be a better He-Man than he ever was. That's point 1. Point 2 was that Teela would be a lesbian and be palling around with her lesbian friend. And point 3 was that Teela would take up the Sword of Power. These are the 3 points that were actually put forward by the leak. These are the 3 points that Kevin Smith said weren't true. And you know what? They weren't true. Kevin Smith was telling the truth. That's what happened. The Chuds came out with a leak. The leak was made up. Kevin Smith pointed out that the leak was made up. They called him a liar. The show then came out, or at least the first 5 episodes of it came out, demonstrating that he was correct and they were wrong. And what did they do? They kind of did a QAnon. They sort of blurred what the predictions were. Yeah, well, I mean, it was just sort of vaguely about, maybe Teela would be a bit more, I don't know. That wasn't the prediction. They got it wrong, and the show isn't what they thought it was going to be. It is an absolute lie, and it's a lie that Kevin Smith lied when he said it wasn't true, and it's also a lie that the show coming out corroborates their side of the story, because it doesn't. It directly refutes it. But they're just hoping people weren't paying that much attention and will kind of take the generalized feeling or the emotional push behind their predictions rather than what their predictions actually were. That's what they're hoping. That's what he's hoping. Or maybe he does have some sort of memory problem and doesn't realize that what he's saying is absolute total bollocks. But here's the thing, even emotionally, it ain't true. It ain't true that He-Man is being demasculated or, humiliated or anything like that. That just isn't true. These things are just factually incorrect. It's like they sort of watched the show, I guess, kind of, but they did it with so much bias based on the predictions that they'd been seeing that they couldn't see the show for what it actually was. None of these things that they think have happened. It's just not true. It's just not true. And yes, Teela is a bit more important in this show than she was in the earlier show. Okay? So?
And it's getting absolutely demolished in the reviews by fans.
Nope. It's getting review bombed by people like you and your audience who don't even care about He-Man, who weren't interested, who just wants to use this as some kind of political football in some bizarre culture war game. That's what's going on. Like, I'd be surprised if most of the people who were putting their review bombs in they probably haven't even seen the show. They've probably just heard people like you talking about it, is the truth. And most of them, to be honest, are too young to have seen the original show. So, these sort of Rotten Tomato audience scores mean absolutely nothing. They mean absolutely nothing. Because all it means is a bunch of people have got together and decided to downvote it for whatever reason. It doesn't mean anything. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're basically reporting on the fact that you guys were reporting on it, really. That's all it means.
And critics love it because critics love emasculating male alpha characters.
What on earth is he talking about, man? These people just live on another planet. Why would critics like that? It's so weird. It's so weird that he thinks that. Just so bizarre. So bizarre. So, who remembers Bill O'Reilly, who was a Fox host back in the day, before he got fired for sexual impropriety, which seems to be kind of the ordinary life cycle for a Fox TV host. Let's fingers crossed that happens to Tucker Carlson soon. Anyway, he was sort of like the Tucker Carlson of his day, and he had a regular segment pretty much every year, I think it was every year, called The War on Christmas. Now, towards the end of Bill O'Reilly's career, the war on Christmas had become a bit of a meme, a bit of a joke, but it didn't stop him from trying to push it, and it was quite successful at the beginning, at least. And the war on Christmas is basically the idea that atheists and secular Democrats and liberals and leftists were trying to destroy Christmas, which is obviously a load of old bunk. But what he would do is flounder around, cherry pick like instances where like a school had decided to change their banner from Merry Christmas to Happy Holidays or something, and said, look at the leftists trying to take away the things that we love. You see, what this was actually, in some ways, a clever propaganda move. You see, the general idea of conservatism, or at least modern conservatism, is to fearmonger about foreigners coming in from overseas and taking away stuff that we like in our country. That's kind of the basic crux of it. It has been since the Nazis. The Nazis were sort of big on anti-immigration and kicking out people they didn't like, and effectively the war on Christmas is taking that and grafting it onto the holiday instead of the country. So instead of the country, you've got Christmas as a concept, and instead of foreigners, you've got left-wingers. And the solution that is proposed for this is to basically create a situation where there isn't a separation between church and state, because that is Bill O'Reilly's true target. And the thing is, that's exactly what people like the Quartering are doing, and that's why they're lying about Kevin Smith and lying about He-Man. They're lying about it because they're trying to do the same grift as the war on Christmas, but instead of Christmas, in this case, it's He-Man, or Star Wars, or any other sort of beloved nerd property, and instead of atheists and liberals, well, it's atheists and liberals again, and calling things woke, the woke agenda, whatever that means. It's very unclear what does woke actually mean, because it used to kind of mean like SJWs, I suppose, or sort of woke scolds and sort of that kind of stuff, but the way the right uses it, woke just means seeing a woman or a person who is not white on screen. That's enough for it to be considered woke. There basically are no woke politics in the new He-Man, like at all. There is nothing about it that is overtly left-wing. I mean, I'd love it if it was, but it isn't. It just isn't. It's just kind of a classic adventure story, the type that you'd get like at any sort of Dungeons and Dragons table across the world, A bunch of people get together, go on an adventure, trying to save the world. It's like, unless you think that too many women on screen equal left wing, I mean, that is just madness. It's got to the point where they're so terrified of women just even appearing on screen at all that they consider that in itself, in its own right, without them even saying anything left wing, just the very appearance of them is considered like communist propaganda or something. It's really bizarre. It's bizarre. And the thing is, like, it's just become, a while back with the whole Gamergate thing and Anita Sarkeesian going on about games, when the truth is she didn't really know that much about games. As a left-wing gamer, I could see that. She was cherry-picking stuff to suit a particular agenda that she had. And the right wing did call her out for that, as well as some people on the left. I myself am on the left and also called her out for the same thing, because I care about truth more than I care about sides. So, there basically is no difference between what Anita Sarkeesian was doing and what Jeremy from the Quartering is doing. He's doing exactly the same thing. He's just the right-wing Sarkeesian. He is not even interested in He-Man show. It doesn't even concern him. But him and people like him are trying to use this to try to create a narrative, the narrative of the war on Christmas for a new generation, that the atheists and liberals liberals are coming in and taking over your media. Well, here's the thing, Jeremy. Those atheists and liberals are the people that created this media in the goddamn first place. Because when you have a political movement like the right wing that has effectively waged a war on art and artists, taking away their funding and trying to censor them and doing all sorts of other crazy stuff towards artists for generation after generation after generation, generally, Jeremy, generally, the people who make art, who make this nerd media, they are left-wing. Like all of your favourite comedians, like anyone who's actually funny, like anyone who's actually talented in creating music, art, anything, all of those people are left-wing. So they're not coming in and doing stuff. What's actually happening is they're doing the same thing that they've always done. Make art that speaks to them and people like them, because that's what artists do. And what's actually happening, people like you are trying to come in and censor them. You're trying to say, no, you can't have women in your thing. No, you can't have black people or gay people or whatever in your art. Because if you do, we'll try and cancel you. We will review bomb you and we will tell lies about you online and we will try as hard as we can to get you fired by cancelling our Netflix subscription and whatever else we can do, because we're trying to exercise everything in our power to get you cancelled because you had that audacity to feature some women in a cartoon that we don't even care about. Now, if that's not cancel culture, I just don't know what is. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and why not, if you haven't, I tried to make this spoiler-free. If you haven't watched it, go watch the first 5 episodes of He-Man, because it's pretty damn good. Hippie Hyena out. Goodbye.